Americans, whether we look at from a historical view of the lynchings that have gone unpunished, to the current confrontations of the loss of life of so many African Americans in their interaction with law enforcement throughout this country.
Well, I think the hubris is in you got the trial of Derek Chauvin 10 miles away. And what does this female cop do? She goes and shoots another African American while screaming taser as if a bullet is equivalent to a taser. And she's been a cop for 26 years. It's not like she doesn't know the difference between these two restraints.
As I said earlier in the warm-up, it's important to understand that before you go on duty as a police officer, your outfit, your uniform has pockets, loops, catches, and each one of those things has a specific purpose so that in an emergency, you know where to reach for your gun, where to reach for your taser, your handcuffs, extra bullet clips, your pepper spray. And so to reach for a gun when you're talking about taser in a moment of excitement says a lot about the mindset of the officer, that she was not ready to go on duty and probably has not been ready to go on duty with that kind of mistake, if she makes that kind of mistake.
But how could she not be? I mean, that would be like me being in the emergency room and you bring in a cardiac patient and all of a sudden I'm excited. I mean, there's some things you do over and over again to the point of where you're on automatic. You know, it'd be like me asking Naeem or Abdullah about some point of law that's basic, and they would just start spouting it. They wouldn't have to go grab a book. They wouldn't have to get warmed up. None of those things. They're cemented in their memory.
That's what we're talking about, is how come that regimen, that cementing has not taken place in so many instances, so that when a non-lethal harm is detected, a lethal response follows in the investigation, the initial investigation of it. And that's the concern that that is the concern of the criminal justice system, or should be. And that is the concern of the Islamic system of justice, is that the social balance be protected and maintained. And we're seeing in so many instances it's not happening. And the question, one question is, why is that?
Yeah, that's a very good point, right? We know in Islamic jurisprudence, proportionality.
Lower your screen. We can only see half your face. Sorry. There you go.
We know that in Islamic jurisprudence, proportionality, whether we're, however you're talking about, whether it's retaliation, right, the law of retaliation for murder, whether it's the law of warfare, proportionality is one of the bedrock foundational principles of Islam, right? Somebody slaps you, you can't pull out a gun and shoot them, right? That's not allowed in the Islamic jurisprudence. But it's the same thing, right? It's proportionality. To Dad's point, what we see over and over and over again is police officers, and to the point where it has become essentially sort of an accepted convention that police officers can respond to situations that don't involve a threat to life with life-threatening force. It happens over and over and over again. And the response that you see from police officers is they should comply. They should comply. Right. They should comply. So right. Non-compliance, whether that non-compliance results in a threat to life or serious bodily harm, doesn't matter. Once you don't comply, the convention seems to be the police officers then are free to kill you. I mean, that's essentially what I think we're seeing, not just in the reality of the cases, but also in the follow-up in our judicial system.
Yeah.
To show you the confusion that occurs at these points of contact between the police and the suspect, there was a video, body camera footage of a previous stop of George Floyd, I think in May of last year, whereas they approached the car and started giving instructions. One officer told him to unbuckle your seatbelt. Then he yelled, "Let me see your hands." Unbuckle your seatbelt. Let me see your hands. Well, you can't do both at the same
They do
time.
both. Yeah.
And the other officer, another officer was on the other side of the car with a gun at his head. And what did he do? He said, "Please don't kill me." They said, "Well, if you comply, nobody's going to beat you up or nothing. Put your hands on the dashboard, but let me see your hands." And that kind of confusion and an elevated voice from a person who has a gun pointed at you,
Mm-hmm.
and you know the history of what's that type of contact has been. It frazzles you. It makes you act irrationally. And I think in several of these cases, the police presence has caused some African American persons to, or their suspects, not to act irrationally because of the fear factor. And that's something I think is going to eventually have to be looked at. Because if people can't control themselves because of this fear.
Well, at the base of what you're talking about is a situation where the police essentially create the situation that results in deadly force. They create the situation. You know, they talk about the police are being trained to de-escalate situations. I think it's a fallacy that police need additional training. Police don't need additional training. They know exactly how not to kill people. And it happens all the time. You get mass shooters that somehow they're able to apprehend without firing a weapon.
Exactly.
The people that stormed the Capitol and were literally assaulting police officers with deadly weapons.
Murdered a police officer.
Yeah, somehow they were able to deal with that situation and then afterwards apprehend these people without any use of deadly force. So police don't need any training in how not to use deadly force. What they need is accountability, because as long as they can kill people of color without any accountability, they will continue to do so. Now, at the base of that statement is another quandary, which is, how is it that you're recruiting people who will in fact kill other people if they're allowed to?
One answer is they recruit them from ex-military.
Hold on, Amina, I wanted to jump in here.
Well, I was going to say, I think all of us at some point in time have been stopped by police. And if you can think about, without guns drawn, how you felt when they pulled you over. Imagine if they got out and had a gun pointed to you. It's no wonder that the people that we see on the tape are confounded. Whether they've been pulled over once, this is the first time, or the second, third, fourth time.
Right.
And so and then the police officers, it's not a request that you get out of your car. It's an order, and they expect you to follow it. And if you don't follow it, then they feel that they have a right to do whatever they got to do.
But how do you
make you follow it?
How do you give a command that says, unbuckle your seatbelt, show me your hands, put your hands on the dashboard all at the same time?
I'm not defending them.
I know. I'm just saying, the conflict in orders shows the irrationality of the situation. I was thinking about a time when I was driving. I think I was going to pick up Frederick from the airport or something. And the policeman pulled me over, not because I had bad tags, not because I had incense hanging or one of those trees hanging from my rearview mirror, was because he wanted to see my car, because he thought he was going to buy one like it.
Oh, God.
And I said, really? Oh, this is just wonderful. But my immediate response in the time it took for him to get out of his car to come to my car was, do I have my registration? Where's my darn license? You know, you're going through this
Right.
list of stuff. Do I have the right little sticker on the plate? You're going through a list of stuff and panicking as you go through the list.
It's a fear of not being perfect.
Exactly. But the other question that comes out, what is first of all, what is a bench warrant? And can a policeman, when they run your name or whatever it is they're running through their database and they see that there is a warrant, doesn't it say whether the warrant is for a misdemeanor, a bench warrant, or a criminal offense?
I hear lawyers.
I can't say for sure. I mean, you ask. I mean, it's a question that we need to get the answer to. But I don't know what kind of information is displayed on their screen. But clearly, a bench warrant will include, what the underlying offense is, and basically what a bench warrant is to arrest somebody who failed to appear in court. All right. So that and it's issued by a judge.
Okay.
And then for that you can be arrested and then you're brought before that judge. But once again, like I say, going to the underlying query that you're posing is to the extent that the officer is aware that the offense is for, let's say, a traffic violation, failure to appear in court, and they do issue bench warrants for people who fail to appear for traffic court. Is this now the justification to say, oh, there's a warrant out here? Because they don't say a bench warrant for traffic. There was a warrant for his arrest. And so that becomes, once again, the legal terminology to justify my behavior, to use whatever kind of force I want to use to, in essence, apprehend or arrest this particular person.
Or it's
Right,
the
it gets you
language
back.
they use when they want to explain it to the public. Because I'm sure that in close quarters, there's probably more to it. But by the time it gets to the public through the media, it was a bench warrant. That means they were supposed to be arrested. They did something wrong. That's the assumption. That's what it looks like.
Well, let's look at that assumption, right? This brings us back to this issue of proportionality. Because the underlying message there is that if they've broken the law, then they should be subject to whatever force we want to apply to them, right? Because if the answer is, oh, well, this was somebody who had a warrant, the message is, well, this was a criminal. So we should have the leeway to do whatever we want to them because they're a criminal. Gets us back to this proportionality. Somebody that's got an outstanding warrant for murder could conceivably be treated as somebody that's obviously dangerous, right? And their response to that individual should be different from somebody who's got a warrant because they didn't show up for traffic court. There's nothing in that warrant that suggests that there's anything dangerous about this person at all. But what you see is that they treat them all the same, right? There's something that occurred to me that never gets said, because there's this whole there's this constant drumbeat about, well, this is all about officer safety, right? We essentially treat everyone as if they are a threat to our lives because that is how we protect ourselves. It's officer safety, right? Fundamentally, a police officer is a public safety officer, right? Their primary function is, in fact, to protect the public, right? So, I mean, in essence, the primary objective should not be officer safety. The primary objective should be public safety. So if there is a situation where an officer needs to make a judgment, the judgment should err on the side of the safety of the member of the public, I mean, in essence, that's what we're talking about. We ask firefighters to do it all the time, right? We ask nurses to do it all the time.
Mhm.
But somehow, in an encounter between a member of the public and the police officer, the safety of the member of the public is no longer a consideration.
Right.
Well, you know,
that's
there's
what they're saying. Of policemen now by fiat are considered heroes. How you get to be a hero for doing your job?
the other thing too is they play up the fact that they could get killed doing their job. That's the nature of the job.
Well, then why
And
they take the
And
job?
the same things in the military. You go to the military, that's one of the possibilities. And it has to be understood that I remember my days in law enforcement, military, police corps, and talking to some civilian guys. They used to always say it's better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6. In other words, if I have to harm you to get home alive at night, guess what?
You get harmed.
But
Well,
I think
I'm sorry, Amina. Go ahead.
I was going to say, but I think Naeem made a good point that that the police officer's first duty should be to the safety of the public.
Yeah.
And what the question I have, as far as in the case in Virginia, is if the person you were going to arrest, who is not considered armed or dangerous or harming anyone, gets in the car and drives away, how are you protecting anyone? Except it's almost like it's a pride thing, you know. Oh, he's getting away, and so I shoot. Whether
There's
I
some
shoot
of, there is
whether I
some of
shoot
that.
taser or
There
whether
is
I
some of
shoot
that.
gun, it's the same mental attitude.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we're not talking about all police officers, but there's a significant portion that have this mindset that are concerning. And while we don't want to excoriate the police in general, they have a problem that they need to work with the public to help resolve.
Well, they also have qualified immunity, which means you know, I mean, taxpayers, finally, I saw some articles today where people are realizing my tax dollars are paying for your wanton criminality here. You know, we can't fix the road because I got to pay some family because some officer who isn't held accountable has shot and killed some kid or somebody else. You know, I'll never forget the kid playing at the playground that they decided he had a real gun and shot him in cold blood. You know, and it's millions of dollars. I don't know if that's proportional either, but it's millions of dollars of taxpayers' money, you know, that is going toward these incidents where police have little accountability and no responsibility. And I don't know what to do about this qualified immunity stuff.
Well, nobody does. I don't think anybody really has a definition for it.
We did try to do that, didn't we? It means no matter what I do, you can't hold me responsible for anything.
No, that's called absolute immunity.
Well,
No, I think the points that have been raised here in our conversation are the ones that need to be to examine. I mean, the key point that has been raised is this whole concern about, I mean, the principle of proportionality. Mm-hmm. And particularly when we start to pose a risk to the life of another human being. Once a gun is drawn, that risk escalates, and where it can only take a poor exercise of judgment, as if we accept the officer in Minnesota's version that I thought it wasn't a gun, that once you've already escalated to use a force, a level of force that can bring harm, whether it's a taser or a gun. I mean, the proportionality is even more extreme because now the person is dead. But nonetheless, even with the use of a taser, what is the justification for using that force. Why is it that, like I said, is to the extent that you failed to comply, I'm automatically authorized now to use a force that can bring about harm, whether it's a gun, a taser, or a chokehold. Once
Well,
again, at that particular point, you're putting that the life of that person is not as important as securing compliance.
the most egregious example of a disregard for human life is what you just mentioned, the chokehold, and what they did to the guy out in California. They beat to death.
Rodney King,
and then George Floyd. You have his hands tied behind his back. He's laying on the side. Somebody has their knee in his back. Another man has his knee on his neck, and they have no understanding of the fact that a human being can't breathe that way.
Oh, they knew a human being couldn't breathe.
I'm saying, I'm sure they do, but I'm saying the fact that they carried on with that that disregarded manner says something that it needs to be explored.
I mean, what I find chilling to this day, and with the George Floyd case, is you have this officer with the knee to the neck, and if you're doing that for purposes of restraint, and then you're going to use all your body parts to bring it, all he had was the knee and his hands in his pocket.
Exactly. Well, you had
not a man. That's not a man.
Down the man's body.
Yeah, I mean, and once again, regardless of whatever his mindset had been to say, I feel this is justified. What is the mindset what are you communicating to the public? Not only to those people who immediately were witnessing, pleading with him to stop
let
it
him up
and let him up. You're killing him.
Mm-hmm.
To no avail. I mean, what is the message that his behavior sends to the public at large? That, you know, your life doesn't mean anything. So if someone runs, if someone resists, you're creating an environment where that is going to you increase the probability for that to occur. You're going to be so dumbfounded, as you say, with fear. You may fumble, and all of a sudden you're making a move that's interpreted what? As a furtive gesture, and I thought they were going for a gun, so I shot in self-defense. That, I mean, even though it was 13 bullets to the back, I was scared and I'm feared for my life. So, I mean, once again, it's the narrative and how it's being abused with some of these cases, and yet the mindset for the justice system is to follow lockstep. Well, that this is permitted because, like I said, when you talk about quality, he had a reasonable expectation that his life was in danger.
Yeah.
But the question I think that still needs to be added is the amount of force that you're using necessary to remove that threat? 13, shooting someone in the back, in my opinion, is never justified.
Well, you know, the kicker too was I did not know and had never read of people being out on bail for murder. And I was so shocked, I didn't know what to do with myself. You know, you get this man for murder, egregious. It's on video, 49 videos. And then he gets out on bail. And I'm saying, oh, that's so special. I don't know.
That issue that you raise is one of the issues that are concerned law enforcement. That people like that can happen to people like that. And they're concerned that there are people like that out on the streets. And when they patrol, they know that they're patrolling streets where there are people like that lurking around with the ability to get guns without being accountable for the acquisition of the guns. So that's an aspect of the job of a police officer that is threatening and has to be considered also.
So is it?
I guess the question I would pose.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
The question I would pose to that is then, why is it that when you confront a white person you're still not coming out the car with the guns drawn. You're going to assess it. Notwithstanding your hand may be near your gun, you don't come out with a white person with your guns drawn, strapped down, notwithstanding. I don't take issue with that. I mean,
cultural conditioning says that probability is that that person is not going to harm you, whether that's valid or not. That's the conditioning of the culture. Even Dylan Roof, when they stopped Dylan Roof and knowing he had murdered 9 people in a church, that I don't think they approached it with guns drawn.
No, they didn't. But and then they gave him cheeseburgers. But let me ask this question. Is it the institutions or is the police themselves?
Well, the institutions are made up of the people that comprise the institutions. Mm-hmm. And what you have in police departments is a very particular closed system. There's a lot of family legacy. People whose fathers were police officers and their grandfathers and their great-grandfathers were police officers.
Their uncles.
And their uncles and their cousins and their brothers and sisters are police officers. So there's that. There is definitely a sort of us against them. The whole Blue Lives Matter, we bleed blue, the thin blue line. There's a propagation of a culture that we are one unit against the outer society that's not within our unit, that is an enemy to us, essentially.
Naeem, do you think that is special to the police department? Because doctors and nurses and those that assist them are the same way. I can't count the sponges I've left in people.
So are cults and gangs.
Yeah.
Are based upon the same philosophy as well.
Inside of these professions.
Right. No one understands us. Exactly. We're unique. We're under siege. And I think that plays into 2 things. I think it plays into how they interact with the public, because if they are sort of internally constantly being socialized that the people they engage with on the streets are an enemy other, right? They're going to approach them that way. Mm-hmm. And then it also perpetuates the circling the wagons and protecting bad actors. Mm-hmm. It's often said, you're only talking about a few bad police officers that do this stuff. But every police officer that witnesses and knows about a police officer that does something egregious, that does something against the rules, that brutalizes people, that steals, that takes bribes, that kills people unjustifiably, whatever. Every police officer that knows about that and helps to cover it up, helps to justify it, helps to protect that police officer, files false reports, they're all complicit and just as guilty as that police officer is. So there may be a smaller number of police officers that are actually doing the acts, but there's a much larger portion of the police department and police officers that protect them when they do it.
Okay.
That's a larger universe of law enforcement people.
We have about 5 minutes left. So let me give people's last thoughts.
The issue of justice and pursuit of justice in society, from our Islamic point of view, assumes that people in society are educated and trained, socialized to an understanding based on Tawheed, the oneness of God and the oneness of humanity. When you take that out of the equation, what happens is other types of priorities come to bear and biases set in, and the kind of harms we see with George Floyd and others come to bear.
Somebody else? Amina, Abdullah?
I think in terms of the points that we raised tonight, I think these are are issues that we must all reflect on to find solutions to. proportionality, like I said, the siege mentality, us versus them. But the critical thing that I think must guide all of these discussions is the principle of the sanctity of life. If that becomes the guiding principle, then it will lead us to a proper reform in policing practices, so that once again, we view the police officers as keeping us, the members of the public, safe, as opposed to a threat to our survival or existence.
If I could piggyback on that, when you talk about the sanctity of life, um, to realize that the sanctity of life is for the public as well as for the officers, and that that if when it becomes a question of sanctity of life versus pursuit of happiness and career, that sanctity of life ought to be the top priority. Where I think it isn't. It's well, if if I can get away with this, then I'll get my pension. I'll be able to stay on the force.
Like
And
that woman that jumped up and resigned.
right? Yeah.
Mhm.
So that the sanctity of life is I think fighting with the pursuit of happiness, i.e., a successful career for police officers.
I think that to Dad's point, there are the kinds of issues that we're reflecting on, where police officers are doing things that are bad or disproportionate and causing harm in society. Um, there, I'm sure there are plenty of police officers that don't do that, for which sanctity of life, for which honor, their training are in fact what guide them. And I think what's important is to set up systems that allow those police officers to step forward, um, and enforce the same kind of integrity within their system that they exercise on an individual basis.
Okay. This has been great, guys. You all are just all so special. And we will close out with a dua.
Man, Frederick.
Lord, we believe in the oneness of your power and the oneness of your creation. We ask you to educate us so that we can achieve social balance in our lives according to what was achieved under the leadership of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be and blessings be upon him. And we ask you to protect us from harming others and from being harmed. And we ask you for blessings in this life and in the hereafter. Ameen.
Amen.
Okay, let me cut the recording. Stop cloud recording.